Coffee break. Coffee break over. Cast iron horsey, giddy up. Hi, welcome back to another Hand-ufacturing segment here. Today we're going to be making a urethane, a brush-applied urethane mold of this vintage cast iron horse. The thing about working with cast iron is not that it's iron, but that it's antique and it's vintage. So, as I always say, if you're working with someone's old artifact, you got to get a waiver on the value in case something goes wrong. In this instance, it's a metal sculpture, so there's very little impact of it. But let's say you forgot some release agent, you had some adhesion issues, you would not want to have to dig yourself out of an argument saying that was a $10,000 horse when it was really a $1,000 horse. So let's get into it. That's my mold maker's caveat, not the how-to caveat. So this horse is, I don't know, it's actually life size. And as I recall, this is back in 1996. And the first things you have to do with this old model, I don't know where they got it. I think it was off this barn. I think I have a picture of that barn. And the first thing you have to do is clean it up. Otherwise, all of the debris that is loose, the rust and things like that, is going to stick to the urethane. So this is just a before picture. And if you look at the lower bottom here, this was missing, and so we resculpted it. I think it's just a head-on shot. Looks pretty grungy. We took a wire brush to it. And then somebody in the shop resculpted some of these leaves here, and now we're ready to roll. The horse has been cleaned up and it's looking pretty good. You can see it was a pretty busy shop back there, and actually later we have segments of how this statue, you can see it's being molded back there. We have a how-to of that. We have a how-to of these panels. So this project was a big how-to project. Back to the horses. Giddy up! First thing that you got to put onto this is PPC. The PPC is polyurethane parting compound. It was my favorite of the day, and it had a wax on it. So it was a one-and-done sort of sealer and release agent. The thing is that when you apply the PPC, you have to rub it in and sort of buff it into the I'll call it the grain of the iron, because the iron was porous, and if you don't really kind of smush it in there, all that little porosity becomes Velcro to the urethane. Oh, well, this picture got a little cropped, or just at the beginning. But what I'm doing is I'm actually holding some liquid urethane in my hands, and I'm brushing it on. And I like to start at the highest point, because the urethane is going to kind of come down and drizzle. Now, people can be conflicted about that, because they say, why would you start at the top if it's just going to drip down on your hands? And but I change each model, but I like gravity working to my benefit. Here's the first coat going on, and although gravity would do a nice job of covering the horse, this has a lot of beautiful detail in it, so that brush really works it in. I'm going to let the first glaze coat tack up, and once that gets a little bit tacky, I'm going to apply another coat. The thing is you have to be careful. If you do it too soon, the first coat is very buttery, and it can be slightly, basically you can tear it. You can break the first coat. So there's a fine line between initial set and the second layer. The second layer still has no thixotropic additive, or whatever that word is I'm supposed to use for that scientist comment, and I'll put another coat on and let it sit. So you gotta, in the mold shop, have multiple projects going on, which we did. This photo sequence, I guess, assumes that that we had presented many other sequences before, because there's some specific how-to parts that are missing. As I've mentioned before, that in the advanced mold making, I don't stop to get to every little detail, but clearly some thickening agent. These days I was using Cabosil, which you have to have ventilation for. It's no joke. Don't work with that stuff unless you're properly ventilated. It's fumed silica, and it's hazardous for you. So what I've done here is I thickened up some of the urethane. This looks like a Permaflex product of the day that I was using. I don't know. I want to call it 74, 70. I don't know what it was. I had to look it up. I get some of the materials from the companies mixed up. And we just kind of marshmallowed this on. And when it's tacky, you can take cloth and add it onto the tacky surface. If you miss it by a day and you're like, oh, I was too busy, just glaze, put a new wet glaze coat on the whole mold, and then that creates the stick for the cloth. Now, in the past, I used to use a cheesecloth, which I think is sufficient, but in this particular shop, they had this heavier gauze, and because this was intended to be a production mold, I pretty much overbuilt this. I very seldom put gauze or fabric in a mold, except in the areas that I know are going to take heavy stress, or there's going to be a seam line cut or something like that. But in this instance, I knew I had some really tough guys in the shop that were going to do the casting, and they would yank on stuff, so I really beefed it up. I was warned by the owners. They're like, you seen my guys? They're big as a house. Oh, that was a little bit out of sequence, actually, because what's happening here is I actually did put a additional gel coat on, and then I applied the fabric. So this is 12 is 13, 13 is 12. Now the whole horse has been covered with fabric, and I'm letting that set up a little bit. And now I'm coming back on with an unthickened gel coat again, and I'm putting it all over the gauze. Now you can see sometimes that gauze wants to peel off, and there's different things you can do. One is you can just sort of wet it and stick it back in place, but if that doesn't work, you take some thread and you just wrap it around the whole horse's head here, and that would hold it in place, and then you tie off the thread, and that will keep it where it needs to be. Continuing the process here, this is a really important place actually. Along this lip here, this edge, any of those high points, including these ears, really need to have gauze. And we're going to have a seam line that comes along this front of the nose here. The mold's going to be cut and here, so I got that in mind. Now the whole horse has been covered with the thickened urethane, so I don't see any fabric. Again, this is an overbuilt mold, but you'll notice I plugged in these ear indentations and some of the nose indentations, and anything here is basically been drafted, because there's going to be a two-piece mother mold on the left and right side of the horse's head, and then there's going to be a piece that comes out in between the ears. So you got to cover up all those undercuts. Remember how textured it was around here where the leaves were? I simply just buttered over that stuff because I don't want to add another additional mother mold. I want 1, 2, 3. This is another way to use these plastic keys. If you've watched plaster mold making videos for slip casting, these little plastic natches are great. I don't know where you buy them these days. It would be a Google search. I have thousands of them because I had a lot. What's happening here is if I took that plastic cup and I just put it on the horse's head, it doesn't do anything. What's happened in advance is I've put urethane inside of that cup like peanut butter, like loading a mousetrap, and then I put it in, and then I stick it onto the horse. And then what's happening is all of these little white cups are full of urethane. And so when that urethane sets, I'm going to take off the cup, and there's going to be this beautiful hemisphere key. What I'm doing right here is not wearing glasses. What the fudge? 1996. Now, the other part that's really important is you see this edge here. That edge needs to be, it cannot be vertical. It's not helpful. You need to flare that out so it helps with the mother mold situation. There's kind of a review shot of all of the urethane. It looks like I've added some more to the ear here. I've added more to the nose. Basically, before I walk away from this horse, I look at everything to make sure that I put in enough urethane everywhere. Now, if I've missed a place, I can always clay it in later, and it's not a big deal, but I think I got it on this one. This is the horse has been spun, and it's looking away from me. I'm behind like a jockey. The keys have been put right along where the seam line is going to be here, because I wanted to cut through registration keys. There's a lot of ways to do this, but I'll let it express out. This blurry picture is me removing the keys. Because there's suction, you just can't take them off like that. You got to break the seal because the urethane could still be a little bit delicate. Urethane takes actually a couple weeks to fully cure, I think is my understanding, and it is cured enough to handle in 24 hours, but it's still pretty fresh. All that cross-linking takes time. It's the same with silicone. Well, some silicones. Now what's being done, the little push out, like this little crater here, has to be trimmed off. That's where the key was pushed in. If it's not trimmed off, I'm basically creating more texture on the mold than I want, and it can be kind of Velcro-y. Now I'm trimming the lip, but look at this. I'm leaving about 1.5 to 2 inches here because I'm a guy who's always saying that when you have to think of the mold upside down, and then that lip is going to be at the top of the mother mold. And if you don't have a lip, when those guys put in plaster or concrete or whatever the heck they were going to do, that lip acts as a gasket and protects anything from going inside of the mother mold. So you always got to do a lip. I didn't do it a few times, and man, I paid the price. You got to use clips, and it's a disaster. I'll show a picture of that. Coffee break? Coffee break over. Now we're ready for building the mother mold. What I'm doing right now is applying oil-based slabs. I should tell you how I used to make these. It's really simple. I would take oil-based clay and I would warm it up in the microwave, and then I would put it on a sheet of canvas, and then I had 2 thin pieces of wood that were next to this sausage of clay, and then I would put the clay down and then I would roll it out. Now I wouldn't use a rolling pin. I had a piece of PVC pipe filled with plaster, and that meant that it was really heavy. Rolling pins, you got to put stress on the outside, and it's not really meant to take the pressure. Dough is soft, but the oil-based clay isn't. So I would use this weighted pipe, you could fill it with cement, and I would roll out these slabs, and then I would cut them into strips. And then those strips would be applied onto the dividing wall here. And you can see I'm jumping right over half of the keys. You see, I want half of that key exposed. This is not the only way to do it. This is, in the molds that I'm making, I tried to do it differently each time because I knew I was photographing the sequence. There's not rules, there's options, okay? Well, a few rules. Wear glasses, right? Which I didn't. This guy, John, he was a nice guy. He was what we call a heavy breather. I didn't point it out. There's another girl that worked in the shop, and she's like, John, I can hear you breathing from down there. He's finishing out this clay wall. It's going on quite nice. The oil-based clay sticks pretty nicely to the urethane. If this had been a silicone mold, that clay doesn't want to stick to it. And there's a workaround that you have to do, but I'll bring that up at the right time. So he's finishing out this clay wall. Now he's cutting in these, what I'll call track keys. The track keys, we'll have to zoom in on this, Pasha. He's basically taken a loop tool and he's cutting a track along the clay. But if you notice, these tracks, here's a track, it goes here and then it stops. There's nothing here. Here, and then it stops. Nothing there. Here, then it stops. You want it like Morse code, dot, 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 or dash, 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 dash. And the reason is if you make one long track key, the track key slides. But if you make short pieces, it can't slide, it only can register. There's another type of key that I would have cut notches vertically, but because this is a big surface, I wanted a different type of key. Now I'm also putting in a couple big registration keys here just for show and tell reasons. But you see the track basically goes up along this way. Now if this dividing wall hadn't been about 1.25 inches, we wouldn't have had enough room for these track keys. So you can put a skinny dividing wall, but you want to leave room. Sometimes people are putting bolts through there. There's keys, so give yourself a little heft. Looks like the same shot of the same, I can't tell. Now, once the dividing wall is put on there, I can look along all the edges and see if I have any undercuts. And if I've missed something by a little bit, right here, you just nook it in with some clay, it'll be fine. The registration of the mold will be all right. Remember, this is a heavy urethane mold, so it's not going to flex out of distortion because of a small divot. Now what I'm doing is I'm ready to apply. I used to make my mother molds out of Forton MG. You guys have heard me say that. I used to call it Frodo. And the Forton was extremely adhesive. And so I needed to put Vaseline onto the urethane mold. There's no room for putting any saran wrap on there. That would be a disaster. And so the Vaseline will keep the mother mold from sticking. And it's heavy enough that it goes into some of the brush texture of the urethane. And I'm going to put a different release, I think, on the clay parting wall. Yeah, PPC. The urethane, just to show different types, I need a heavier release agent on the urethane and a lighter release agent on the registration dividing wall. This shop was so badly lit. If you take a minute to look at shops, it's wonderful that they had all of this space here next to a workbench. In my mind, this is ideal, but their tables were not laminated, so we worked on a laminated sink cutout. But these lights were so harsh to be under because the shop was dark and then you had these fluorescent stuff. I would have liked a little more even lighting. The first layer of the Frodo's going on with the marshmallow coat. And the marshmallow coat, as you've seen before on the baboon video, is just going to go First I do the dividing walls, and then I'm going to do the rest of the horse here. There it is. We got the marshmallow coat. See how much faster this is than a video? You don't have to struggle and watch me go like, oh, the marshmallow coat, and then there's doot little Pac-Man.
But I would have loved to see you actually do it too.
Why?
Because it's the process that's interesting. That's like watching you do it instead of like looking at a picture of you doing it.
Well, I did it. You weren't there to watch. I mean,
right.
So,
well, it's not my fault, but
not my fault either. This is the thing: this is 1996, and so when I was doing these were not shop environments that were camera friendly. Plus, we didn't even have the internet. So, what would have been the point to make VHS cassettes? And these were all designed for book photo sequences, which is how it was done in the old days. I get that watching a workflow is very helpful, but I also think that this is like you take an orange, you squeeze it, you get the orange juice. You don't have to watch the guy going to pick the orange off of the tree, get it, cut it in half. It's more.
I would have loved to see the whole process of picking the tree, picking the orange from the tree and everything.
I'll show you an orchard tree that's this small, and you can watch over 30, 40 years it grow, and then you can go get your orange.
Okay.
It's funny because I just found pictures of that in my dad's thing. Okay. Now, what John has done is he's glassed up the first mix of Forton. It's basically the Forton, and then it's thickened with Cabosil, and then we've hand mixed in chopped glass. What he's doing, if you're ever working with Forton, is you have to wear, I think heavier gloves are better, but you would dip your hand in water, then you'd grab some of the Forton, and then that water would allow you to apply these little mud patties of Forton onto the horse. And right here, you can see the thickness of the layer difference going on. And what was really common for beginning mold makers to do is, I suppose I could have pigmented this, it would have been helpful. I didn't think of it at the time. What would happen is somebody would take their glass coat and they would smear it too thin, and it would be not have enough strength. So we'd grab these, I would teach people to grab these little mud patties, put them on, smush them down, grab another, and they would mud patty their way across the piece here. And that way you didn't have a lot of thin spots. All right, now the glass out is finished. And what I've done is I've taken my glove, I've put it in water, and that's acted as a smoothing agent. And it's pretty good because what happens is if you don't smooth out that Forton, all those little chopped glass pieces become like little syringe needles. And then, man, they just catch you, and it's like, it's really, you take a hit for no reason. Now what we've done is we've turned the horse around, and you can see that because the oil-based clay adhered nicely to the urethane, that it really didn't take a lot of extra support in order to put that clay wall on in the beginning. The clay wall has been removed, and what happens is there's a sharp little flash that's left along the tops here. And if John doesn't catch that really quick, you got to get a grinder out or some wire cutters or something. So if you work this when it's soft, it's really good. This is the trick between working on a lot of different projects. I'm always saying work on a lot of different projects, but if you do the wrong step at the end of the day, you start your day tomorrow in the morning with a really extra effort day to grind something off. So like a chef, the table puts in an order for fish and steak and a baked potato. You got to know that you'd cook the fish last. You know, you got to time yourself here. And that comes with knowing a lot of different mold processes at the same time, because we'd be doing this mold here, we'd do plaster over there, and you got to have all these time sequences going. These trimming tools are from the ceramic industry. They were pretty nice. This is a heavy trimming tool, and then you can get in there and chug away with some razors. And now what John is doing is he's taking some clay pieces and he's filling in any gaps along the registration wall. If you have pitting or gaps on your dividing wall, the next layer of mother mold that goes onto that can create a mechanical bond in one of those voids. So you go through and you fill them out. There'll be enough registration around the horse, even if you have a few pockets, so you don't have to sweat that. Yeah, he's just filling it in. Now, this is a sequence that I forgot to do for whatever reason. Again, being in a shop many different times. The next piece I'm going to make is this other half of the horse, but you can see I've penned out my third mother mold section here. Close up. This is his choice. I think it's a bad call. He's pretty furry, and the Forton is really hard on your skin. It gets in your nails, and then you're really picking out cement. So I don't know why he did that without gloves. Putting the Marshmallow coat on, got the glass coat on. You can see all these little sharps up here. You got to get those down when they're just soft set. All right, now we're back to the third part here. This third part is this has all been cleaned up, and we're just going to drop a Forton, a Frodo plug right in here. So you put the Vaseline on the urethane, you put the release agent on the dividing walls, and you're good to go. Release agent, and I think I went right in with the glass coat. I mean, it was pretty easy. All right, splitting a mold. I've let this set up overnight. I'm back the next day. Looks like I wore a uniform in those days because I'm always in the same clothes. I did have a laundry machine. It's just how it looks. So anyways, what I want to say about splitting a mold is remember I had cut all those keys in the dividing wall. So when I go in with this chisel, I cannot just go power chow right through it. I'll cut my keys. So I'm kind of tapping it to create a slight gap. And anytime a slight gap opens, I'm going to throw a shim right in there, because otherwise I'll open it in one place and it'll pinch in another place. And then I'll just keep pinching the mold like this and I won't get anywhere. So whenever you see an opening, wedge it, and it'll come apart pretty nicely. Same thing, be careful. First thing it did is it relieved enough pressure to release the third piece. Then we're pulling off the sidewall there, the next side. Now I'm cutting a seam line that goes up back of the horse, up over the nose of the horse. Now a lot of people will take a scalpel and they'll cut a jagged seam line, and that's fine. This method, I just wanted to show that you don't have to have that in all of your molds. The seam line was designed to go up the back of the horse head, as I mentioned, and I knew in the model that it was pretty smooth. So if I created a jagged seam line, maybe the casting would have a jagged line, and I thought just a straight line is clean, and it was just my choice. I also have those registration nubs right here that are going to help keep this together. And the urethane is thick. It's at least a 1/4 inch thick. Yeah, expressed right here. You can see that the cut came up the back here and then needed to feather out over the ears, because that has to open up out over the ears. And if it doesn't open up over the ears, you can't get your casting out, or if you do, you might break the ears later. Do they even make RC anymore? RC cola? It's old school. All right, John's showing the dealio here. I don't know why I had a flashlight, but oh, look at this casualty. See, these busy shops, that would happen all the time. Somebody would set something somewhere, and then you bring in materials, and shop walls come in smaller and smaller and smaller as things on the outside get packed up. That's a bummer. Those panels used to sell well. Frank Lloyd Wright. All right, I'm cutting down along the nose here to finish this off. You can see I've already released the bottom here. I think what I wanted to do was to test the release of the mold before I actually cut the seam line, because I wanted to see how much was going to be needed, and I determined that I got enough release of the mold here, so I knew that I wasn't going to have to cut 2 pieces of urethane. I could just zip it right down the nose here. Mold making is a big deal. If you're an employee at a shop, you have a lot of forgiveness because you can mess up on someone else's time. But once you quote a job and you're on the hook, you really don't want to mess up. You don't want to mess up the model, and if you know all of these tricks, you can get through it really fast. So if you bid a job for $3,000 and you don't mess up, you walk away with good profit. Otherwise, you're really risking it. So it's worth it to know these things, and it seems tedious, but when you're getting paid to do something, man, this is training you're not going to get anywhere else too easily. You got to go do an apprenticeship somewhere or get hired, and then you got to have proximity to the shop that does it. And that was the advice that I had from somebody early on. I said, how do I be successful at business? And they said, go work for someone else who's already doing what you're doing. And I thought, well, where is that? I didn't know where an old plaster shop was. So if you've watched another video that we did, we watched a special effects guy make a silicone mold of this big head, and the mold was so heavy and overbuilt, and I thought, oh man, don't ever do that. Well, here I'm doing that, but it's for different reasons, because I knew this mold was going into harsh conditions and it needed to last. This was a mold that was being built for someone else. They were paying for my time to make it, and I did not want to give them a delicate flower. The urethane's removed. Now I'm cleaning out any residual clay or yuck inside. And here's the finished mold. It looks like there's a little bit of clay residue right here, and that can be washed out later. I think I just put it together to check the seam line. And you can see this is the neck of the horse, so there's no seam line. The seam line is right here. Here's the mold finished. I didn't put a case on this one because I knew it would stand still like this pretty good. Well, the mother mold sections were open. What I remember doing is I applied PPC, or you can put wax or shellac or all sorts of things inside of that mother mold and over the outside, because this mother mold needs to be sealed up, that if you get any plaster on it, you can just chip it off, because if you get plaster inside of your mother mold, it's going to throw the urethane liner out of registration over time. So seal everything up, and I think we're pretty good. Let's see what these are. I think these were figures, other cast iron things that we did or we're gonna do. I don't remember making the mold of those. I think this is a barn where the horse heads were going in one of the suburbs. Yeah, so that's what I have. From my perspective, I have several different timelines and mind lines going. One is to share some information. This was 96, so there's a lot of things that I know now that I didn't in 96, but this was still pretty good information. Also, back then, I was obligated to make a mold for someone else. As I mentioned, if you're making a mold for yourself, you can take all sorts of shortcuts, and you don't have to overbuild things like this. If you're the molder and the caster, that's a real win, because you know how the mold was built, you know what it took, you're going to respect it. Other people are just going to get in there and they're like, I only have to deal with the casting, and the mold broke. Oh, well, it's not my problem. Well, in some shops it's like that, in other shops it's not, but this was an old shop, so it was a rough handling place. But that's what I got. Posh, what did you got anything?
Cool.
Cast iron, horsey, giddy up.
We gotta do some competitions.
T-Rot.
In real life, and make some molds on camera. See who does it better.
Okay.
Someone who's been watching the videos, or someone who's been doing it for 30 years. We'll see.
Let's see how it goes. All right, thank you. If you will, at the beginning. So, adjustable. If you've ever made a mold and you've used a Tupperware container, you know that your mold ends up as a thick brick, and it's a waste of material, and your top is going to break and not your friend. This is definitely worth it to have this set up. Around the model, you have to have spacers. Oh, how did that mold out? Who has the silicone mold right now? The little purple one?